The introduction to cleanup is essentially a prerequisite, or it's an introduction for your modules 4 and 5, because sa may modules 4 and 5 natin, we'll be focusing a lot on the skills or on the techniques that you have to do for cleanup. So for this one, it focuses more on the concepts, principles, and things you need to know before you're able to do cleanup. So with this one, let's have a short introduction. Cleanup is the process of in the animation workflow, particularly on the production stage, and it is the creation of the final line of a drawing based on a rough drawing. Your rough drawing is basically known also as your sketch. So any type of sketch or any type of initial drawings that are done in a very loose fashion. So hindi pa siya yung final. What you have been doing for your grade 11, those are technically called renders, and yung renders na yun are also called as roughs because we have a specific way of doing cleanup. So with that one, this is the final stage, probably, when you're going to create an animation, of course, before the coloring. So yung cleanup natin can be done either for one of two tasks. So you do cleanup either for keyframes, which is the main focus of our lesson, and then you also have in-between. So you'll be learning in-betweens. However, you're not necessarily expected to create, to do cleanup. But later on in the industry, you're kind of expected also, once you're an in-betweener and you are also a cleanup artist, you can kind of shift between these two professions. So they have similar processes. So you also have to analyze, you have to redraw, you have to do the cleanup, submit it. But they also have a few key differences in terms of principles. So when you're doing cleanup for keyframes, ang pinaka-point natin is for you to be able to lead in the in-betweener. So, ang keyframes kasi is the basis of how the in-betweener is going to do their in-betweening. Like, yeah, you have your exposure sheets as well as your timing charts. Pero, the hints that you can give through your drawing can only be expressed through the use of the keyframes. So if you're not able to properly transmit that to the in-betweener, then you have failed your part as a cleanup artist for the keyframe animator. For the cleanup artist of an in-betweener, ang pinaka-purpose natin is on precision. Because essentially what you're doing is that you're creating the final line, and you have to make sure that the motion is as clean and as seamless as possible for you to be able to create a seamless and clean animation. So under cleanup, it's not just about creating the outline or creating the final line. It can also involve a lot of things like, let's say, analysis, redrawing, and you will also need to have your skill of modeling. Ang cleanup natin can be done either on the same paper or in a separate sheet, which will be discussed later on for your materials and equipment. So just some of the purposes. The main point of cleanup is for you to unite the design of the entire animation. One of the principles that we've focused on in our animation workflow is to make sure that the animation gives this illusion that only one artist has created it from start to end. So for you to be able to achieve that, one thing that you can do is to standardize a lot of the guidelines. So you can standardize the modeling, you can standardize the color, and even the way that the outline is created. So cleanup helps with that one. A cleaner cleanup can also facilitate smoother and more seamless movement between drawings. Because if you don't have a cleanup, usually the action is not very clear and it's not very seamless. So with that one, cleanup helps dictate those actions much more easier compared to color or any other aspects of the design. We also have here emphasis of different characters from other parts of the animation. So we have something in staging, wherein it's important for you to have a harmonious relationship between your characters and your background. But at the same time, you also have to make sure you're able to emphasize to the audience na this is the character and then this is the background, and they're two separate things. Because if you don't do that, tendency is that the character fades out to the background, and you don't want that to happen. You have to make sure that the character's actions are very clear, and for you to be able to do that, you might need a stronger cleanup. You can also see this in props. So usually in cartoons, props has much more thinner cleanup lines compared to that of main characters, and even the characters themselves. So usually background characters have thinner cleanup lines compared to that of the main characters. If you would like to emphasize a character, then probably you might want to make their cleanup lines darker and much more bold. And then lastly, one of the most important purposes of a cleanup is for you to facilitate easier coloring. So traditionally, if you're going to use acrylic, then it would be easier to you to color within the lines if you have a very specific type of line. For digital coloring, it really comes into its importance. So the one that we use for coloring digitally is we use a paint bucket tool in the animation industry. So if you've used a paint bucket tool, you have to make sure that the line, or you have to make sure that the shape that you're placing the paint bucket tool to is a solid shape. So if there is gaps or openings within that shape, then it would bleed out. If your lines are not very crisp and they're not very clean, what would happen is that the lines, or you would see like these white things at the sides of the line. Tendency is that it wasn't colored over with the paint bucket tool. So with that one, having a proper quality line would help you in terms of coloring digitally, especially digitally. Here are the personnel involved. The person who creates the cleanup is the cleanup artist, and they do the cleanup either for the keyframe or senior animator who does the keyframes. And they also do work for the in-betweener, which is for the in-betweens. Together with that one, we also have people who are doing quality control and monitoring. It depends on the animation studio whether they have some of these members, or they have all, or they don't have any of them. It depends as it can come into different factors. One of the main factors is the number of animators. So of course, if you have more animators, you need more people to do quality control and monitoring. The purpose of quality control and monitoring is that it's not just about for line testing. So again, one of the most important aspects is to make sure that the animation is as if it's only been created by one person. And for you to do that consistently, it would be easier for you to monitor them through these types of people. So another important thing for these people is that every single job or profession right here can also have different skills and qualities. So for example, the animation director, aside from quality control and monitoring, they also have to take note of quality control and monitoring for in-betweening, for keyframe animation, for compositing. They also have to do line testing, and at the same time, they are also animating the they are also directing the animation. So they have quite a lot of work for them. For the departmental head, they don't really have a lot of work compared to that of the animation director, but they also have other work aside from quality control and monitoring. So one thing about the departmental head, if ever you have a department in the production studio, it's usually divided according to character, because it's very rare that you see one animator doing different characters at the same time. It's much more wise to have a number of people only draw a certain character for you to maintain consistency in your modeling. Probably the only people who draw different characters at the same time are usually background characters. So with that one, aside from the departmental head being a keyframe animator, they also have to do quality control and monitoring. And since, let's say, the animation studio might have more animators, it is possible for you to divide them even further to different departments. Next one is a production assistant. Production assistant is like the assistant of the departmental head, animation director, production manager. If maraming students, then there might be a production assistant for the supervisor or the trainer. An important part for production assistant is they may not know animation skills. I'm not saying that for you to get this job, you don't need to know any animation skills as well. Probably for some of them, they are animators. However, those skills are not necessary since what they're mostly doing is office administration work. For production manager, they need some sort of idea for animation concepts and skills because they might also do quality control and monitoring through the use of line testing. Lastly, for you guys as students, you don't have any of these people. Instead, for those who are learning to be animators, you would have either your supervisor, your trainer, or your subject teacher to do that for you. Nextly, we have here traditional versus digital cleanup. So traditionally, what would happen is that the cleanup would happen on pencil, on paper. And then after that, it would be transferred into something which we call as cells. So imagine your cells as like, it's like pages of plastic. So it's kind of like the, plastic for your face shield, but it's a bit thinner. And with that one, they would trace the pencil cleanup with ink through the cells. And then after that, it would then be colorized. Now that we are using more digital ways of coloring, we would have a pencil, and then scan it and then color it digitally. For entirely paperless animation, of course, you can use your freehand or pen tool, which can probably be discussed in your animation 12B. Next one is we have here materials and equipment for traditional cleanup. We'll be presenting these materials and equipment, as well as recommend some things on how you're going to do your DIY Lightbox. So one of the most important things as an animator is for you to have a Lightbox. You can't do animation without any form of Lightbox. It's essentially our working desk. It's like a drafting table for architecture students. So you do here mostly keyframing, in-betweening, and cleanup. Here are some of the important parts. So you have your animation disk, you have your light source, which is at the bottom of the animation disk, you have your peg bars, and of course, usually this is placed at a wooden surface, placed at an angle. Next one, you have here your animation disk, also known as a plexi disk, which is usually a circular, white translucent disk. I've never seen any other animation disk apart from a circular one. So this is detachable, so probably you've seen it before at our room U304. You've seen that it can be detached. So with that one, it's easier for you to rotate. So yung rotation na yun would help you in creating more precise cleanup. So the animation disk can have a peg bar, it can have a separate one. So the peg bar is usually a strip like this, which can help join all of the animation papers in place. So there's an important aspect for peg bar. You have here one circular at the very middle and then two rectangular ones at the side. So this characteristic of the peg bar can be used for the animation paper. So one of the important aspects when you're doing animation is for you to make sure that your paper is as clean as possible. Any, like, let's say, small creases within the corners of the paper can be considered as a damage to the paper. So, like, let's say, any crumple, as much as possible, we prevent that. So, when you're passing your animation paper from keyframe artist to cleanup artist to in-betweener, it might get damaged over time, especially yung sa may peg bar natin. So, the peg bar is actually designed for it not to be damaged so much, especially when you're doing something which we call as pegging and unpegging. Pegging is the process of placing the animation papers in the peg bar. So it's quite easy naman to create. Pero the second one, which is unpegging, which is the removal of the animation papers to the peg bar, it can get a bit quite rough at some cases. Like let's say when you're rushing and you have to submit something now, you'll have to remove it forcefully. So with this one, it makes it easier for you to remove it, to secure it in place, and at the same time not damage the paper. Moving on, let's have the animation paper. So it's kind of like a normal bond paper, a bit thinner at that, and it's usually bigger, 15 by 12 inches. And of course, it has these holes right here. Next one, we have our drawing tools. You have one for the cleanup proper, and then one for rough keyframe drawing, redrawing, analysis. Firstly, you have here a mechanical pencil. So the mechanical pencil is a type of pencil that we use for cleanup. It kind of depends on the animation studio whether you want to use a mechanical pencil or a graphite pencil. So probably 3 years ago, when we were teaching animation to now second year college, now third year college students, we would teach them, or we would always ask them to use graphite pencil na Staedtler. But right now, it would be okay for us to use mechanical pencil because back then, Western animation is usually done through the use of graphite pencil. Japanese animation usually uses mechanical pencil, pero as of late, we can see more Western animation studios use mechanical pencil. And you can kind of see why. So number one is that it can be used with a lead. So yung lead na yon, you don't have to sharpen it every single time. When you're using a graphite pencil, yung sharpening na yun can take up time, which can be used for doing cleanup or when you're animating. Second of all is that it has this consistent point. So when you're using, like, let's say a graphite pencil, you have to sharpen it. If you don't sharpen it, it can get as thick as a few millimeters. Ito, it can only get as thick as 0.5 millimeters, and usually yun lang naman yung kailangan natin. So for a mechanical pencil, ang recommended size for cleanup is 0.5 millimeters. Recommended lead is black, and it should be in 2B. Here we have the blue pencil. The blue pencil is a type of pencil that we use for redrawing processes. So redrawing is the process of you making corrections to the rough keyframe drawings before you can actually do cleanup. So and it can also be used for rough keyframe drawing. So anong purpose ng blue pencil na to? Why do we need it in the first place? Why can't I just use a normal pencil? So when you're going to use a normal pencil na color black yung lead, you would have to use a separate paper for you need to use a separate paper for the rough keyframe drawing, and then you need another paper for the cleanup. So that would be 2 bond papers. If you're going to use a blue pencil, the paper for the rough keyframe drawing and then the paper for the cleanup can now only be 1. So in terms of saving resources, you're able to do so much more with a blue pencil. So you can also see like a blue pencil come in other different colors, like let's say red, pink, green, and any other light colors. But if you use really dark colors, like let's say a dark blue or even a purple one, it's not really good because it's easier for you to erase. By the way, why is it called a non-photo pencil? It's called a non-photo pencil. It's because when you scan it or when you expose it to light, you won't see it as much compared to that of the black pencil. That's also the reason why you can place it in one paper. Because once you have scanned it for the final animation, it would not be seen, or the rough keyframe drawings would not be seen. The final cleanup line is the only one that can be seen. Lastly, we have here our animation folder, which is also known as a model pack or a layout folder or a scene folder. This is the final output of the layout and posing stage on the pre-production, and every single animator in the production stage would receive something like this. So it contains essential items that you need when you're going to animate. So like for example, model sheets, storyboard, backgrounds, field guide, frames, exposure sheets, special instructions, and production information. The production information is usually placed right here as a label to the folder. So even like in digital animation, we still use an animation folder, albeit more digital. So with that one, you would need different naming conventions. Kind of like how you would name a variable in programming, there needs to be a proper naming convention for an animation folder. Here we have other materials and equipment. So you have your eraser, sharpener if you're using a graphite pencil, masking tape, mirror, exposure sheet, line tester, and scanner. So yung line tester and scanner natin, we won't really need it for now. You only need to use your phone camera for your modules 4 and 5. Now let's have a look at the Lightbox alternatives. So of course, if we did not have this health crisis going on, we would be using our room U304, who has now na-repair na siya. For the information of everyone, na-repair na siya, matibay na siya, so hopefully hindi na masisira yung ilaw. Probably by the next time na magamit natin, hopefully. So, since we don't have a light box or a proper light box, and due to the health conditions as well as financial struggles, I can't really allow you to everyone would just buy like a drawing pad. So here are just some alternatives if you're really truly, for you to be able to create your light box. So here are the important things when you're creating a light box. You need to be able to create a translucent or transparent flat surface, and you also need a light source. So yung flat surface na yon, you need to be able to draw on it, you need to be able to stick masking tape on it, you need to be able to place your paper on it, and in some cases you might even need to rotate it, but that's not really necessary. Tapos, under that flat surface, you need to have a light source. The light source doesn't have to be very powerful, but the more powerful it is, the more effective it would be to allow you to create more frames for, like, let's say 5 5 keyframes or something like that. Pero for this activity, we'll only be using 2, so it would be a bit easier for us. So here are some of the ways on how you can create the Lightbox. So the best example or the most practical example that I've seen, like even the graduates right now, when they need to rush like an animation project, they would place their phone inside of their file cases. The file case can be any color, and then that can be their Lightbox. If you want an angle, you can stack books at the sides of it. Next one is you can use like these large and sturdy Tupperware cases like this one right here. But please make sure that it's a flat surface. These ones at the sides are fine. Pero yung mga may logo sa gitna, it might not be recommended. Also, some cases are more sturdy than the others. So there is a possibility also of these ones like kind of bending when you're exerting pressure on them. So please take note of that one. Next one is if you have a glass table, that would also be usable. If you have like these glass things lying around your house, I don't know, I've seen some that would just have glass surfaces lying around their house. Something like that, place it on top of something wherein they can place a light source inside of it. If you have like this translucent clipboard, you can use something like that one as well. Light sources are kind of easy to understand, like smartphone, tablet light, flashlight, LED lights, desk lamps, or even USB or laptop light. Here are some other features that can be added, but they're not really necessary. It's just a way for you to make your cleanup easier. If you want to construct your own DIY light boxes, if like let's say you have someone, or if you're able to create your own light box with the materials around your house, then why not? So for this example, you can see like a lot of references online. So for this example, you can use like wood at the sides, you can use a glass at the top, and also you can have like a light source in the form of a small light bulb. We also have like engineer's light boxes. It kind of looks like a normal display light box, but of course this one is flat, so they use it for like tracing. If you have like display light boxes like this, you can use it also. However, please have a flat surface because these ridges right here won't let you draw as smoothly as you would like it to be. Meron yung ibang matatapang, they would use their own tablet or iPad, but I don't really recommend it because you can destroy the surface with that one. And mas maganda if you are going to use this, place another flat surface on top of it. And for those who can kind of afford it and their parents don't mind buying it for them, or if you really want to pursue like let's say the idea of animating even when you're outside of or when you've already graduated, then you can use a drawing or a tracing pad. So for those who would like to buy para hindi kayo ma-scam, the smaller ones, the one that would fit like 1/2 of an A4 paper, they're usually around 200 to 300 pesos. You can even see some at less than 200 pesos. These ones right here, which is usually A4 size, so these ones come up around to 300 to 400. Those are the normal ones. This one, it's I think like a specialized type of drawing pad. This exact model is I believe like at least 800 to a few to 1,000 pesos or something like that. So if you don't mind it, or if your parents don't mind it, or your guardians don't mind it, you can buy something like this, but I don't really recommend you buying it as much as possible for the financial benefit, for the health benefit. We use all of the materials that we have currently right now at home. So with that one, let's extend to your notes on materials and equipment for cleanup. So for those who are using their PDF, nasa may pinakababa siya, just before, I think, the references. So here are the things that you'll be needing. First of all, you have a light box. So yung light box natin na DIY option natin. So it is much more recommended that number one, it could be able to accommodate at least 1/2 size of a short bond paper crosswise. It is also recommended that you have one light box, one student. But I do understand that you can't really attain that. You can't be able to attain that. So with that one, if like let's say you kind of live at the same barangay, or you live very close to each other with your classmates or even your other schoolmates who are in other sections, you might want to use the same light box as well. So pwedeng 2:1 or even 3:1. Just an important note is number one, if you're going to go at a very far place and you're risking your health and safety because of that one, I don't really recommend it. I actually don't want you to do it. So if you have that kind of situation, just find anything that you can in your house. Pangalawa naman, as much as possible, if you can do this as long as it doesn't hinder the performance of everyone, especially the owner. So if you think na you're hindering the performance of the owner, I recommend that you have your own setup. Next one is we have, of course, the animation paper. We don't really have like those specialized ones. You won't be using a peg bar as well. So we will be using 1/2 short bond paper or typewriting paper. If you're going to buy one, it would be much better for you to use a typewriting paper because A, it's cheaper. B, it is also thinner, so the light would pass through much more easier with it. If you don't have short bond paper, you only have long bond paper, it's also okay for you to use 1/2 long bond paper. But once you've done it, please make sure that your modules 4 and 5 have the same size paper because they're going to be connected. And then later on, during your finals, once you have used one size of a bond paper, you have to use it consistently. Also, for you to be able to stick to your lightbox, it would be recommended for you to use masking tape or any other tape that does not allow much adhesion. If you're going to use like packing tape or scotch tape, it would be easier for the paper to stick to that surface. So pag tatanggalin mo siya, it would be, you can damage the paper, which is again not very good when you're looking at the standards of animation. However, since we're living through tough times, you can use a scotch tape. But again, if you want to, if you can, or if you're going to go out and buy it, might as well buy a masking tape or something. For the pencil naman for cleanup, ang pinaka-recommended ko is the mechanical pencil. The mechanical pencil that I recommend is 2B black graphite lead with 0.5mm thickness. The brand, I don't really care. You can buy like mechanical pencils as cheap as less than 20 pesos. You can even get like 30 to 50 pesos on average. And then the really expensive ones are a few hundred pesos, of course. If you don't want to use mechanical, if you have like a 0.7mm or a 0.3mm thickness for mechanical pencil, that's fine. But if you have a 1mm thickness, I guess that's a little bit overkill. You can still use it, but it might be a bit difficult for you to utilize and maintain consistency on the line. Whereas for the lead, mas maganda talaga na 2B. You can see a lot of 2B black graphite lead. If you have a B or a 3B, that would be fine as well. But if you have an H or an HB, I don't really recommend it since they don't become very consistent and they're very light. So, hindi siya magandang tignan. For those who are using graphite pencil, ang ginagamit sa industry is usually a Staedtler 2B. Though I do understand that 2B is quite difficult to acquire right now. So pag naghanap kayo around the bookstores right here, you might not be able to find a Staedtler 2B. So if you can find like a B or a 3B or any other brand, that would be fine as well. However, please take note of the brand as well. Kasi like let's say some of the cheaper ones and even the number 1, number 2, number 3 pencils, yung mga Mongol pencils, they're not very consistent when it comes to the darkness of the pencil. So in some cases, it might be too dark. In some cases, even in the same stroke, you might have a combination of dark and then light lines. Please make sure that when you're choosing a pencil, that the line is consistent. For those who are using number 1, number 2, number 3 pencils, a number 2 Mongol pencil is fine. Pero if possible, use a number 1 because they tend to be the darkest. And then for the blue pencil, if you want to use a blue pencil, the one that I use is a mechanical pencil version, the Pilot Color Ino, which can be found in like Laser, meron din siya sa Art Bar, meron din siya sa may department store. And they're usually 0.7. So wala ka usually mahanap na 0.5. Yung mga colors natin, you can use any color in that range except for violet. Kasi violet is very strong and it's not very, you can't really erase it as much. For graphite pencil, the one being used in the industry is a Prismacolor Col Erase. It's not available in Baguio. Other alternatives, if you like, if let's say you don't have a colored pencil, but at the same time you don't want to waste any paper, you can use a graphite or any other mechanical pencil with a light graphite lead. So like for example 4H or 2H, any type that is lighter. So with that one, you still need to erase them. It's still going to be visible, however it's not going to be as visible. If you have like let's say other brand color pencils, you can use those ones, but please make sure to choose the ones that can be erased. And watercolor pencils, I don't really recommend them since they're almost impossible to erase. For redrawing, you can use an eraser. If you want to use anything for redrawing, I recommend that you use a kneaded eraser since you don't have to remove any eraser shavings. Or if you don't have them, you can just use a simple plastic rubber or a plastic eraser. We're not going to use an eraser for the cleanup proper, so remember that walang erasing sa may cleanup natin. So of course, if you're going to use a graphite pencil, also have your sharpener at hand. So those are just some of the notes for materials and equipment. With that one, let's move on to the general steps. General steps are actually 4 with a 5th additional one. So analysis is once you receive your animation folder. You're going to receive them, check them, and assess the contents of the animation folder. Make sure that everything is in place. Afterwards, the keyframes needs to be assessed for their action, timing, and design. And the main purpose of analysis is for you to help ascertain the steps and the things that you need to do before redrawing. Kasi it's quite impractical for you to do analysis and redrawing at the same time. Like let's say if you have one mistake while you were doing redrawing, you'll have to analyze again, and then you're going to have to redraw. And in some cases, you're more prone to mistakes when you're doing them at the same time. So ascertaining all of the mistakes beforehand makes it easier for you to do redrawing. Also, consultation may be done during analysis. Next one is we have redrawing. Redrawing is the process of correcting the action before you do the actual cleanup. So redrawing is essentially a preparation of the cleanup proper. What this does is that it helps you maintain precision. Kasi cleanup essentially is one of the most difficult things that you can do as an animator. If you're going to ask a lot of our ICT graduates, the one that they don't really like about animation is doing cleanup because it's something that requires a lot of precision. Pag nagkamali ka ng isang beses, you're going to have to repeat it again. So to prevent any mistakes in cleanup proper, you have to make sure that your rough key drawing is optimized so you don't get confused in any way, shape, or form. Cleanup proper is again the actual process of creating the final line. Afterwards, you're going to submit it, label, double-checking, and submission of the cleanup and animation folder to the appropriate personnel. If you've done everything correctly and everything goes your way, that would be the end of the cleanup stage. However, in some cases, there might be things that might have gone mostly through the fault of the animator, and in some cases, it's not the fault of the animator. So that is something which we call as revision. Revision is the correction of any types of calls that were checked by the quality control team. So usually, pag may binalik sa inyo, that's usually your fault. However, in some cases, like let's say the animation director felt that there might be some changes in the animation, then it might be sent back to you, but not for the purpose or not for the reason that you screwed up or something like that. So with that one, let's move on to the types of roughs. So these are, you would receive at around one of two things when you get a rough keyframe drawing, one much more often than the other. So now let's move on to the more ideal type of cleanup rough. So here we have like a clean render. So if you're going to notice it, it's kind of like how you would consider as the final stage of a drawing right now, that you're not an animator. So you can see that the lines are very clear. You can still see the basic shapes and guidelines. However, these basic shapes and guidelines probably nagamitan ng blue pencil, or maybe the lines are much lighter compared to that of the others. You can clearly see what the main line is that you're supposed to clean up and what are the things that you'll have to erase. You can also see that a lot of the things here are complete. So if you get something like this, you'll have to cherish it because it is something that you won't see a lot of the times. Most of the time, what you will be seeing is a messy render, which looks like this. If you're not the one who created this, you won't be able to understand what's happening, and that's the challenge for redrawing. So for example, you can clearly see what the basic shapes are. You can also clearly see where you cannot really clearly see what are the lines that you'll have to redraw, because the basic shapes and the lines that you'll have to redraw are almost exactly the same thing. Next one is you don't know what line you're supposed to do cleanup for. So for example, this chin. Are you supposed to use like this basic shape right here? Or am I supposed to do cleanup on this pointy thing right here? In a lot of cases, you will have to do fill in the blanks. In the previous example, you can see that the hair right here is clearly outlined. Whereas for this one, you'll have to draw it on your own. Lastly, it is mostly off model. So in some cases, you might have to redraw it entirely. We also have here the anatomy of a rough keyframe drawing. So when you receive your keyframe drawings from the animation folder, it can kind of look like this. So we have our, you have your labels right here, which is color-coded. So the one in the upper left corner is a frame label. Every single label or every single frame has this label. So it would indicate to you the number or label of the frame. It depends on the animation in this or the animation studio you're a part of on how they would do the naming conventions for this one. In some cases, it would just have the number. In some cases, you would have two numbers. So one number for the scene number and then another number for the keyframe number. In most cases, you would see usually a letter like this and then a keyframe right here. So the A right here represents the scene, and then the one right here represents the keyframe number. So usually you would receive one keyframe and then another keyframe, and then these two keyframes are at a circle. So if it's encircled, it means that it's a keyframe. If there is a triangle enclosing it, that is a breakdown frame. A breakdown frame is the middlemost point of an animation. And then if it doesn't have anything enclosing it, that's an in-between. Second of all, at the upper right side, you can see right here the timing chart. So the timing chart is the alternative to that of the exposure sheet. So the exposure sheet, it's a bit more complicated to ascertain. So it's essentially one paper wherein you're going to have to find all of the details. All of the other parts of the exposure sheet might not be necessary. So an alternative to that one is the timing chart. The timing chart is an easier way for you to ascertain yung timing for the in-betweener. So as a cleanup artist for keyframes, it is necessary for you to copy this one exactly. Because if you don't copy it exactly, or if you don't copy it as cleanly as you should have, what would happen is that it would confuse the in-betweener. And that would be irresponsible of you as a cleanup artist. So for this one, you need to know how to copy it and also how to read it at some point. So here's the anatomy of it. So you have, of course, your two keyframes right here. You have to counter check. The first keyframe and the last keyframe has to be present. So if you receive this type of keyframe, you need to have an A8 also as well. Next one is that you have right here like an elongated S line. In some animation studios, this would be a much more curved line. It can just be a straight line, but usually it's like this curved S line. You have here like numbers at the side. So these are the things that you might have to, or the in-betweener has to do in between for. It is possible for the A5 to already be present, which is a breakdown frame. Again, the breakdown frame is the middlemost portion of the action. So if you're going to see it, like let's say even if this was an A7, yung A5 natin is not technically the middlemost number. So it's possible for it to be an A6 or even an A7, depending on the action. But essentially, in a time chart, you would see that this is the middlemost one. If there is little spaces between the in-betweens, that would mean that it is slower kasi there are more drawings. If like let's say there is more space between the keyframes or between the in-betweens and the keyframe, then tendency is that it would be faster. So for example, the speed between A1 and A2 is much slower compared to that of the spacing between A7 and A8. So this is how you're going to copy it. You're going to copy it as if you're doing post-to-post animation. So what do we mean by that one? So pinakauna, you have your keyframes right here. you have a created distance. Next thing you're going to do is that you're going to divide it by 2. So, hahanapin ko yung gitna. I'm going to place the breakdown frame here, which is A5. Next one is that you're going to use also these curved things right here, which would help you determine the spacing. So what does this mean? So there is a curved line that is connecting A1 to A4, same type of line that is connecting A4 to A5, A5 to A7, and A7 to A8. That would mean that these distances are of equal length. So you would basically divide it again into 4 parts. So from A5, hahatiin mo na naman from A1 to A5 to get your A4. Yung from A5 to A8, you're going to divide it again for you to be able to get your A7. And then, next stage. Now you're going to see right here, we have the distance between A1 to A3, A3 to A4, A5 to A6, and A6 to A7. They are all of the same distance. So what would happen is that they are of the same timing. So again, hahatiin mo na naman yung spacing nila. So between A1 to A4, hahatiin mo yon, that's your A3. And then you have your A5 to A7, hahatiin mo yon, that's your A6. Lastly, we also have here the same spacing for A1 and A2, and A2 and A3. So, hanapin mo yung space between A1 to A3, hanapin mo yung kalahati, that's your A2. So this is something which we call as pose-to-pose animation, because essentially, you're planning out your poses by dividing it into breakdown frames. Breakdown frames, ibig sabihin, they're the middlemost frame. So you keep dividing them over and over again until you're able to animate all of the frames. So realistically, as an in-betweener, you would do something like this. So you have your 2 keyframes, A1 and A8. I will be animating first A5. Then, from A1 to A5, hahatiin ko ulit. I will be animating my A4. Then, after that, from A1 to A4, I'll be animating A3. And then, from A1 to A3, you have your A2. So you have here the first half done. Now, I'll be moving on to the second half, doing the same process of dividing it until I am able to create all of the frames on the lower half. Next one is we have the production information. So for the production information, which is at the bottom left corner right here, sometimes nasa bottom right din siya, but usually bottom left. So it indicates general information of where the keyframe comes from. So the name of the animation, the episode, if there's an episode, the scene number, as well as the character. In some cases, it would even say like other information such as the action that's happening. We also have here animator or special instructions. So right here, it's placed at the head part of the character. But technically speaking, you can place it anywhere on the frame. So the purpose of this one is to give specific instructions that would focus on the action towards the in-betweener. So as a cleanup artist, you don't really have to copy this. You would need to copy it using a blue pencil. So with that one, what would happen is that you would simply copy it and not make sure that it has been copied properly. Lastly, the rough keyframe drawing, which is basically anything that you've drawn for the keyframe. It's the keyframe that you have to do cleanup for. Next one, just a short review for modeling. So for this one, I trust na you already know this since you had this during your animation 11B. But I'd like to focus on the videos right here. So right now, there are 3 videos, 2 for modeling and then 1 for cleanup. And then the last one is going to be for the synchronous learning session. So the first 2 right here are actually focusing on how to do modeling. So I've chosen a video by a YouTuber and a professional animator, Ethan Becker, who focuses on the idea or on the notion that when you're going to do illustration or even animation, it is necessary for you to do it with a reference. If you're not going to use a reference, then that's not a good idea. So with this one, the ideas that he's saying are also applicable to that of modeling. So here we have an example of the part of the video. So you have right here an important thing. So first of all, before you can actually do the modeling, you have to have your reference photo. So in reference photo natin, you have to break it down to its most basic shapes. There's not really a stated process. So even the process that I've placed right here is not really a recommended process. It's anything that makes sense to you. So if it makes sense to you to be more logical to your approach, If it makes sense to you to be more loose and more spontaneous towards your approach, that's fine as well. So you have to divide it first, analyze it first before you actually do the drawing. When you're redrawing it, you have to make sure that it is aligned, o kaya naman it's accessible to you. So your reference photo must be accessible to that of your actual drawing. So you can do it side by side. However, it is recommended that you have a separate paper for this one and then another paper for your actual drawing. Next one is you have here the sizing. So the size is exactly the same. Even like let's say where the top of the head starts and where the chin ends, all of those ones are consistent. You have also guidelines here that are based from the reference photo. And an important part is that do tracing in modeling. That's true. You trace the basic shapes. You trace this one so that you know how this one happens. However, when you do tracing, it's mostly used for analysis. So to give you an example, of playing a portion of this clip. So what he's doing right now is that he's tracing the mouth. So he'll be transferring it also right here to where he's going to draw the character. So with that one, it allows him to get an idea of what that shape is and how he's going to have to translate it right here. Because usually it's quite difficult for you to analyze something by having all of these other elements. Probably you might just want to isolate it. An important thing that he does next is that he deletes it. He doesn't let it stick around. Instead, what he does is that he uses it for reference and then afterwards draws his own version of it. So that's an important part when it comes to modeling. You use the tracing part for analysis. You don't mostly use it whenever you need whenever you're going to use it for the actual model. So it's mostly used for reference. You have to delete it afterwards if ever you're going to trace it. And then the last part, though it was not shown, I believe it's shown in the other video. The reason why it's better for you to have it in two separate papers is for you to place your drawing on top of that of the reference drawing so that you can see any differences. So for example, you have right here yung sa may jawline natin. So yung jawline natin right here, it's a bit thicker in the reference compared to that of what he's drawing right now here. So please check out yung videos natin. It's a great idea for you how you're going to do modeling. So these are the tips in modeling. We also have here tips in analyzing renders and tips in redrawing. I'll try to make this as fast as I can. So first of all is to take note of everything in the animation folder. So here we have the animation folder parts and how they're going to contribute to you as a cleanup artist. Please take note of every single part of the animation folder. And a very important part is that if there is anything missing, please consult any of the production managers or assistants. Anything missing that was not reported earlier will be accounted to you. So when you're working in an animation studio, a big thing when it comes to, like, let's say loss is the copyright laws. So anything that's missing is a direct violation of the copyright law. So if you don't report it, like let's say you've seen the mistake and then you did not report it. That would mean that you might have stolen it. So if anything happens like this na may biglang nawawala, you have to report it immediately. Usually the production information would state to you what is the contents of those folders. So with that one, you can use those ones as reference. Next one is to understand the modeling first. Again, focus on the modeling before you actually do any type of cleanup or any type of analysis or redrawing. Consult the senior animator or supervisors if you have any questions. So the senior animator is the best person to ask any questions kasi the senior animator was the one who created the keyframes. So with that one, anything na you might want to ask, they have a direct answer. However, the senior animator is also doing a lot of other things. They can supervise other animators. They might also be involved in quality testing and also drawing the rough keyframes. So with that one, as much as possible, if you're going to consult with the senior animator, do it na parang isang bagsakan. You have to analyze very early on any questions that you need to ask. You might want to ask them as much as you can for the senior animator. Because usually the senior animator is quite a busy person. If you don't have it's quite unprofessional for you as an animator to go back to your senior animator disturbing them every few minutes or so to ask 1 or 2 questions. If it's not possible, like probably they're busy or something, please consult other members of the quality testing team who know skills in animation, like let's say the supervisor, department head, or even more experienced animators in your department. And then later on, as you move on and you become more experienced in animating, you might not even need those types of consultations, and in some cases, they might even go to you for consultation. And lastly, project how the cleanup will affect the other parts of the production process. As an animator in the animation industry, you're essentially a cog in a machine. So what you're doing will directly affect everything else in the animation. Nuances or creating these small changes are fine as long as they are undetectable and they would help the animation. But if you create something so radical that it's obvious, even though na it's much better, or if you don't follow, like let's say, everything else that happens, it disrupts the flow of animation and it destroys something that we try to create, which is immersion. Tips in redrawing: use and take care of proper materials and equipment. So using the proper materials and equipment optimizes the workflow of doing cleanup and allows you to work for longer periods of time with little to no stress. Essentially, ang point nito is to keep your area clean and tidy, so you can create your own workspace, and optimizing that workspace would be better for you. And also, place all of your things wherever you need it to be. Wag yung naka-place lang anywhere. Next one, use another paper if necessary. Again, if you're going to use a blue pencil, it is possible for you to place it only in one paper. Pero pag, let's say, when your redrawing process gets a little bit out of hand and you need another paper for cleanup, then you can use something another paper for cleanup. Pero again, if you're not using a blue pencil, it would be much better for you to use it separate papers for cleanup and redrawing and rough keyframe drawing. Keep lines clear by erasing unnecessary lines. At the start of your redrawing, erase anything that you don't need, because anything that you don't need might cause a distraction. And then after you're done, please make sure that everything else is as clear as possible. Any unnecessary lines might cause the precision that you are aiming to have when you're doing your cleanup. And also, a good thing that you have to do is that when you're going to use a blue pencil, it's best for you to run your eraser over the entire drawing, not deleting it entirely, but just making the lines as invisible as possible, so that when you do clean up, it's not as obvious. Because in some cases, pag masyadong, like let's say if your clean up, or when your blue pencil is a bit more darker, like you have a lot more lines for your blue pencil, even though that it's technically called a non-pencil, if you write it, or when you have a strong enough line, it can possibly be seen in a scanner. And then lastly, maximize finger, wrist, elbow, and shoulder movement. So usually we use yung wrist for movement. Pero yung wrist natin, it can get overexerted as you move on and you create much more animations. And if your wrist gets compromised, you can get like carpal tunnel, and that would lead to a few more consequences like surgery, physical therapy, and so on. So as animators, we're kind of like athletes in our own right, wherein you also have to take care of specific parts of your body for you to function well. So one way of you to do that is not to overexert your wrist in doing these longer lines. So if you can use, or if you're going to draw longer lines, it would be better for you to use your elbow or your shoulders to help facilitate the movement. So that's it for the introduction to cleanup. If you have any questions, please do so on the text channel.